Welcome to the New South Wales Council of Social Services Building Resilience for Emergency Responses podcast, where we hear from local, place-based services supporting their community through disasters. Nunjajajam, Riverston Neighbourhood Centre, Muslim Women Australia and the Family Place Maruya share their stories of leadership, innovation and commitment needed in difficult times. Hello, this is Eleanor from the New South Wales Council of Social Services. You're listening to the Building Resilience for Emergency Responses podcast. Today, we're talking to Nemat Kharboutli, Manager of Linking Hearts Multicultural Family Violence and Homelessness Service at Muslim Women Australia. Well, thank you for joining me today, Nemat. This session is, we're just having a bit of a chat to see how you and your service have been impacted by disasters. And I guess how your services responded to those impacts and what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what support you sort of think would be useful. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us and having me. I really appreciate having the opportunity to be part of this conversation, and I think it is important to just take a moment to stop and reflect.
Great, thanks, Nemat. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Nemat Kharboutli. I'm the manager of the Linking Hearts Multicultural Family Violence and Homelessness Service here at Muslim Women Australia. I love the work that I do, and I love being connected to purposeful work and to a sense of community as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I know a lot of the people that I speak to have just that passion for the work they do and supporting their community, which is really great to hear about as well. So tell me a little bit about Muslim Women Australia.
Muslim Women Australia has been operating for 40 years now. We support multicultural communities, primarily Sydney and Southwest Sydney districts. We provide services in relation to settlement services, domestic family violence and homelessness support, as well as general community development initiatives around young people and older women specifically. And that's across direct service provisions like refuges, accommodation, housing support, emergency relief, legal aid, job skills, a whole range of case management services, as well as general capacity building initiatives, social cohesion and leadership opportunities for young people.
That's a really broad sort of range of services. It sounds like you're probably busy normally. So can you tell me a little bit about how your service and your clients have been impacted by disasters in the last few years?
Our communities and our services and our clients have been impacted in different ways. I think when we're talking about specific service delivery clients, there's been a huge significant impact because we do provide a homelessness service. And so the challenge specifically around domestic and family violence, crisis accommodation, transitional accommodation, some of those technical things around homelessness was very difficult to manage. And then the knock-on effects, because we support people who are Australian citizens as well as people who are on temporary visas. So the nuance and the differences in the challenges was quite broad and complex.
COVID obviously was one of the main sort of disaster that impacted you and your clients. Were there any other disasters that have impacted your clients?
I think it was a really compounded the challenges that people experienced. We did a survey throughout the first wave of COVID as well as the second Delta strain of COVID. And what we really found was three primary concerns around the economic impacts, the mental health impacts, and the social impacts. And what was particularly challenging was just the breadth of challenges faced by different families, different communities, different needs. And that's also including, women that we support who are supporting children with disability, what that meant when things like curfews came out. The fact that things were changing so quickly, day by day, it really did create a very different dynamic and environment on the ground.
With COVID, the impacts came out over such a long period of time. It's interesting how you say, you have that opportunity to be a bit more proactive in terms of anticipating what the impacts might be. Have you seen how the impacts on the community have changed over time?
Yeah, I think it's important to sort of give some context. Sometimes when we deal with disasters and we deal with distressing situations, we expect a certain level of control or we expect a certain level of expertise and awareness, but it really was an environment where we hadn't experienced this type of disaster before. And so I think there needs to be some grace given to everybody working in this way. We have to talk primarily first in relation to the environment we were dealing with, which is, multicultural communities, primarily in Southwest Sydney. In moments of crisis, people need practical support and practical help. And having organisations that were really in touch with the sentiment on the ground, that were not vilifying of people's different experiences, that was able to do a lot more good than harm.
You made the great point about having a bit of grace and giving each other a bit of grace around that. It was an unknown situation. We were learning as we were going along. We sort of think we have to have the answers and we have to know things and be able to respond quickly. In terms of the impacts on perhaps your workers or other workers that you've seen, was there any way that you could sort of build in that support around, it's okay to not have all the answers and, we're working in this together?
Yeah, I think at Muslim Women Australia, we really bring our spiritual activism into our daily practice in the work that we do. And we have multicultural team and we have multi-faith team and a team with no faith. And that is also reflective of the clients that we serve. But that doesn't mean that we can't provide a sense of calm. We talk about certainty in the uncertain and a sense of reliance and control what you can control and let go of what you can't. And that's crucial to our individual, collective and organisational health and well-being. We were quite strategic about how we did that in our internal processes around managing our health and well-being physically, mentally, spiritually and emotionally of our own staff and team. We produced 2 reports actually during this time. One was called Serving with Purpose and the other was called Hope Over Fear. And we tried to sort of document this in a way that was not just documented, but also living and breathing it every single day.
Yeah, it's great to hear that you've done that thinking around also and that work around looking after the staff, acknowledging that holistic, you're a whole person with a whole other life that you often have to bring to work as well. And just, I guess, finding the positives out of a actually really challenging situation as well. So, Nemat, you've talked a little bit about the services you've delivered, and you did touch on collaboration with government and how early on it was a little bit hard to communicate what you were doing. But as we went through the lockdowns and the pandemic, it started to work a little bit better when they started to realise the value of the grassroots organisations and your connections. Have you got any examples where you worked well with government organisations or other services?
I have to really give real credit and acknowledgement to Multicultural New South Wales and DCJ specifically from the government perspective, because that's who we really closely worked with, as well as New South Wales Police Force sort of coming to the table later on in the game, and COS was crucial in making that happen. One really good example is working with other services in the local area to improve material aid and financial, food relief and all of those sort of challenges. Coming out of sort of the Delta wave, working really, really collaboratively and closely with Multicultural New South Wales when, that sort of Christmas period was coming around the corner and we knew it was going to get, quite challenging on the ground. And so we developed COVID care packs, which included like oxygen meters, blood pressure machines, all of these things that were actually getting really hard to find and get a hold of, so that we could actually support people's wellness at home if they were afraid of going into the hospital system. So there was extensive case management support, but also really good alliances and capacity building initiatives.
Those examples show, just how many different services you sort of have to pull in sometimes to get the results that you need. So you've mentioned police, Multicultural New South Wales and DCJ and federal, state. We're sort of looking to a future where we're sort of trying to deal with those challenges while we're doing our business as usual. Do you have any ideas around how you maintain a connection that's meaningful with these various different agencies and organisations? So when the next thing happens, we know what everybody does and how everybody can help.
I think first and foremost, it needs to be a two-way communication. So it can't just be a top-down approach, because it doesn't work, and sometimes those policy settings need to be refined and they can miss the mark. There needs to be a real acknowledgement of the work that government agencies do, their reach, and then also where that reach ends and where sort of social services and community organisations can really add value. It's also really important that we understand how communities themselves identify their own experiences in these structures. I think that needs to be central to our disaster planning responses in the future. I really do think that times of crisis are not times to develop existing relationships. Those existing relationships have to be reinforced and realigned in times of crisis. So yeah, it is a very big question, but I think sometimes we have the structures there. It's not always about developing the structures. It's actually just about using them meaningfully and purposefully and making sure that we are being effective and efficient and targeted and strategic in our engagement.
When you think about disasters or COVID and the impact, how does that gendered sort of nature of the work, I mean, there are a lot of women working in the social sector, we know, how does that come out, especially during a disaster? What do you see are the issues there?
Look, I think there's definitely a gendered component to disaster planning that needs to be incorporated. I think when we look at the social services sector and community organisations, especially if they're place-based or smaller community organisation, a huge proportion of the workforce is women, and it's an ageing workforce too. And so when we're dealing with a pandemic and a health crisis and caring responsibilities and all of these other things that have come up, we need to be really mindful about what stress that places on the sector. And I can hand on heart say that we are still grappling within our own organisation with the fatigue. So from a gendered perspective, from a women's feminist perspective, I think we definitely need to look at what does caring and participation look like in times of disaster. From a youth perspective, we need to look at what are the impacts on, young people, because we saw that siblings, especially in multi-generational households, they had to do online shopping, they had to care for other school-aged children. So I do think a specialised lens is required that is culturally, linguistically, religiously appropriate and safe is the way that we need to do that.
Great point, Nemat. We have the structures there, formal or informal, now because we've had to come together so often in crisis. So yeah, building on those. Going back to your clients and people in the community, especially from a migrant or refugee background. So there's kind of a concept sometimes that, yes, people from a core background may be more vulnerable during disasters because they didn't speak English as a first language or for the trauma that's happened in their background. But also there's some sort of growing ideas around that people from a core background, or especially from a refugee background, may be more resilient because of their past experiences. So do you have any ideas around that, or have you seen that in the clients that you work with?
Yes, I think that's a brilliant question and a brilliant way of framing it. I have seen that, and I think it's starting to actually show in the evidence base, which is fantastic as well. I know the Social Policy Lab at Sydney Uni have done some work around like an index which actually shows that migrant and refugee communities and their children actually have greater grit and determination because of some of the resourcing. As a first generation myself, child of migrant refugee, we actually say, pressure can create diamonds. And I think that that's a real strength because you do have to navigate. You do have to work a little bit harder. There is glass ceilings. I really do believe that, vulnerability and disadvantage and the way that we use those terms can be quite othering and can sometimes be quite disrespectful. We actually really do know how to be resilient, how to care for one another, how to be resourceful. And these things often get lost in a really bureaucratic way of doing things. But that's where some of the best responses have actually come out from.
Fantastic, Nemat. I have really enjoyed talking to you today. So you've given me, and I'm sure the listeners, so much insight into your particular challenges for Muslim Women Australia, but also some of the, achievements out of that sort of really challenging space as well, and some great insights into also the community and some of the various different challenges and achievements as well. And I think really highlighted to me that importance of, looking for the positive in these negative situations as well, because they are there and it's really important to look for those. So Thank you very much for your time, Nemat.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for having MWA showcased in this way in the work that we all do collaboratively. I really appreciate you making the time for us to be here today.
We thank our podcast guests for their time and valuable insights. The New South Wales Council of Social Service Building Resilience for Emergency Responses podcast was made possible with funding from the New South Wales Government's Social Sector Transformation Fund. For more podcasts, case studies and disaster resilience tools for your service, visit the Building Resilience for Emergency Responses webpage on the NCOS website, www.ncos.org.au.